Hello. What's up? What's up? Welcome to a live stream, or if you're watching in the future, a video all about the rule of law. What is the rule of law? Oh, let's check the audio here. Sounds pretty good. Rule of audio. Now, rule of law is kind of an interesting topic. And I'm not an expert in it, so I'm not going to be coming at this from an expert perspective. I'm going to be coming at this from a layman's perspective, just thinking, how do we get a little bit of a grasp of this thing called the rule of law? It's kind of an interesting question. Thanks, folks, for joining. Someone became a member of the channel. Thanks, Emily Shaw. Thanks for becoming a member. Other people, feel free to do that if you'd like. No pressure. Thanks for joining and watching. And obviously, there's Patreon as well, which is the same as being a member, just a different platform. But yeah, obviously, I had a public podcast episode over on the Verbal Journal. You could check that out this past Sunday. And next one will be private, just for the patrons and the members and so on. So, consider joining. We do love talking about law, the idea of law, the idea of justice. Obviously, I made the image for this live stream a image from Better Call Saul. Or I guess Breaking Bad. Actually, I'm not. I think it's from Better Call Saul, right? But it's Saul's office. Because, I'm trying to draw you in. I'm trying to say, hey, it might, have something to do with the stuff we talk about on this channel. But we're just going to be learning here. We're going to be learning together. Maybe you already know all about rule of law. Maybe you're an expert in it, and that's great. I respect that. I'm not. So I'd like to learn more about the rule of law together with an audience. And then I'd like to also kind of show that this is something anyone can try to get a grip on. You can't just become necessarily an expert without, a lot of work, but with just a little work, you can get enough of a grasp of the concept that it helps enhance your sense of justice. So obviously Better Call Saul, all about justice and what is and is not justice. I know my audience here on YouTube cares a lot about justice, right and wrong, scruples. And I do too. I'll just say before we get into sources and stuff, my basis for understanding the rule of law comes from a philosophy of law class I took in undergrad, where, I got a philosophy degree in undergrad. So I was just taking all these different philosophy classes, and I thought, okay, philosophy of law, that sounds interesting. And in it, we learned about the concept of the rule of law, which I had not been familiar with before that. And it's kind of a funny, interesting name, right? The rule of law. It's a little bit confusing. And I think for a lot of people, they don't really get that it's different than law. It's a meta thing from law. It's the law of law, essentially. And it's just how laws should be functioning and how laws need to be functioning to be legitimate laws. It's an interesting question. Now, I don't remember all that much from this course. One thing I remember, there were 7 different standards or something, some philosopher wrote about what makes a law legitimate. I don't know. One comes to mind, just the idea that laws have to be prior, they have to be in existence prior to applying them, or you know what I mean? You can't convict someone of a law that you create after the event of what went down. The laws have to exist temporally prior. They have to be somewhat understandable. But there's all these other aspects of rule of law that honestly slipped my mind. And I think even if we don't come out of this stream with a degree in law, which we probably will end this stream without a degree in law. But even so, I think it's useful to try to understand this stuff. Because the question of the difference between law and justice is pretty important, and how law and morality can be separate, how laws can be best sculpted to influence people to behave positively. Because obviously things have been legal that are wrong, right? I think most of us can agree about that. And obviously things are legal now that are wrong. We're never kind of perfect with our legal system. So thanks y'all for joining. Hello to everyone in the chat. Say hi to each other if you'd like. And yeah, let's see. So first up here is the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. So what do they know is what you're probably thinking. What do they know? I know, that's fair. That's totally fair. But it's a good resource to look at sometimes, and I thought it would be a good place to start. The Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. So let's check it out. What is the rule of law? What's rule of law? Phrase rule of law can be distinguished from the phrase a rule of law. The latter phrase is used to designate some particular legal rule, like the rule against perpetuities, or the rule that says we have to file our taxes by a certain date. Those are rules of law, but the rule of law is one of the ideals of our political morality, and it refers to the ascendancy of law as such, and of the institutions of the legal system in a system of governance. Comprises a number of principles of a formal and procedural character, addressing the way in which a community is governed. Formal principles concern the generality, clarity, publicity, stability, and prospectivity of the norms that govern a society. The procedural principles concern the processes by which these norms are administered and the institutions like courts and an independent judiciary that their administration requires. On some accounts, the rule of law also comprises certain substantive ideals, like a presumption of liberty and a respect for private property. So substantive being contrasted with procedural. So rule of law is about how laws are put forward and maintained, and also about what particularly they are in reference to. And people can have different degrees of that, or different perspectives of that, the degree of, how much rule of law is one versus the other. But certainly, on some accounts, there's a substantive aspect of the rule of law, like presumption of liberty, respect for private property rights. So that's substantive. It's a specific what that you could say is an inherent part of rule of law. You could also say it's not. But these are much more controversial, and indeed we shall see there's a great deal of controversy about what the rule of law requires. Okay. The rule of law is one ideal in an array of values. Okay, we're going to try to skim here. Some people say it's different than democracy, human rights, and social justice. The most important demand of the rule of law is that people in positions of authority should exercise their power within a constraining framework of well-established public norms rather than in an arbitrary, ad hoc, or purely discretionary manner on the basis of their own preferences or ideology. So that's kind of the crux of it here. The idea that there are rules of laws, and the laws are not just whims, of the people in power. It makes sense, obviously, and you could imagine the same for any system. How does a school function? How does a family function? Obviously there's authorities in any system, in any organization, but how those authorities exercise their authority can be more or less principled, or more and less whimsical on the other side. So, insisting that the government should be accountable through law when there is a suggestion of unauthorized action by those in power. So, as my sense is, and we'll maybe see more about this, but the famous Nixon thing, if the president does it, it's not illegal. That's sort of the crux of not rule of law. Okay? So crux, I've said it several times now, so I'll try not to keep saying the word crux, but if the president does it, it's not illegal. That idea is basically the counterpoint to the idea that we should have rule of law, is my sense. We'll see if I'm right about that. Rule of law is not just about government. It's also about citizens respecting and complying with legal norms even when they disagree with them. When their interests conflict with others, they should accept legal determinations of what their rights and duties are. Also, the law should be the same for everyone so that no one is above the law and everyone has access to the law's protection. Okay. That sort of strengthens what I was just saying here. And I'm going to try to make this the least interesting and the most boring stream ever. So this is a great thing to fall asleep to, and you'll wake up, with a renewed interest in political philosophy and legal stuff. The requirement of also, the law should be the same for everyone. The requirement of access is particularly important in two senses. First, law should be epistemically accessible. It should be a body of norms promulgated as public knowledge so that people can study it, internalize it, and figure out what it requires of them and use it as a framework for their play. So epistemically accessible means able to be known. Obviously, laws are written in all kinds of legal jargon, but there are probably some constraints on that, even though it doesn't seem like it. But certainly, they need to be publicly published. Obviously. It is interesting, though, that people get accused of crimes and convicted of crimes that they weren't aware was a crime, because that's not a justification. You can't say to the judge, I just didn't know that it was illegal. But there must be situations where that's like somewhat vindicating, I would imagine. But in general, no. It's expected that it's expected. I don't know if it's expected that you know all the laws, but it's not a justified excuse that you were not aware of the laws. So, and that's that's sort of that's part of the rule of law, necessitating that laws are public. Secondly, legal institutions and their procedures should be available to ordinary people to uphold their rights, settle their disputes, and protect them against abuses of public and private power. All of this, in turn, requires the independence of the judiciary, the accountability of government officials, the transparency of public business, and the integrity of legal procedures. Oh, nice. Wow, we got a painter in the chat. What type of painting are you doing? Representative, abstract, acrylic, oil? What's going on over there? Because these generalities, it is controversial what the rule of law requires. This is partly because the rule of law is a working political idea as much as the property of ordinary citizens, lawyers, activists, and politicians as of the jurists and philosophers who study it. So we all really should be caring about this, and we all have a right to care about it and have a voice about what the rule of law entails. The features that ordinary people call attention to are not necessarily the features that legal philosophers have emphasized in their academic conceptions. Legal philosophers tend to emphasize formal elements of the rule of law, such as rule by general norms rather than particular decrees, rule by norms laid down in advance rather than retrospective enactments, rule by norms that are made public, not hidden away, and rule by clear and determinate legal norms, not norms whose meaning is vague or contestable. But these are not necessarily what ordinary people have in mind when they call for the rule of law. They often have in mind the absence of corruption, the independence of the judiciary, and a presumption in favor of liberty. Interesting. The law comprises many things. So, distinctions between the rule of law and the rule of legislation, identifying the former with something more like the evolutionary development of the common law, less constructive and less susceptible to deliberate control than the enactment of a statute. There's also continual debate about the relation between law and the mechanisms of government. For some, official discretion is incompatible with the rule of law. Like, for example, pardons, which we'll talk more about later. For others, it depends on how the discretion is framed and authorized. For some, the final determination of a court amounts to the rule of law. Interesting. No, that seems very childish in my opinion. For others, aware of the politics of the judiciary, rule by courts, particularly a politically divided court, is as much of an instance of the rule of men as of the decision of any other junta or committee. So I don't know exactly where I stand exactly on that, but definitely don't believe that what the court says equals the rule of law. That's the whole point. If we do have to listen to what the court says, but we also occasionally need to fight back against laws that are outdated or, people have a right to express their opinions about how courts are enacting legislation. And then, representatives ideally, the Congress people and so on, and in states or in the country, then would have an influence on the laws, obviously. Ooh, digital representational painting. Very cool. Very, very cool. Love it. People watching in the future are like, I don't care about what someone's doing in your chat. Well, too bad. You know what I mean? This is a live stream. The fact that the rule of law is a controversial idea does not stop various organizations from trying to measure its application, like the World Justice Project. Interesting. Countries like Norway and New Zealand rank at the top of rule of law league, and countries like Zimbabwe and Afghanistan at the bottom. Interesting. Criteria can hardly be described as rigorous, but people in business value these rankings as part of their estimation of country risk for foreign investments. Interesting. So rule of law, been important for many years. We're going to have to skip through certain things. We can't, this is not, got Aristotle, Locke, Montesquieu, okay, Dicey. We can't look at all this. You know what I mean? Buckminster Fuller. No, I'm just kidding. Different Fuller. Rule of law and rule by law. The rule of so some people consider the rule of law to lift law above politics. The idea is that the law should stand above every powerful person and agency in the land. Rule by law, in contrast, connotes the instrumental use of law as a tool of political power. It means that the state uses law to control its citizens, but tries never to allow law to be used to control the state. Oh, interesting. Right. So that's one way to think about it. The rule of law means, as I said earlier, laws being subject to laws, the state being subject to laws, and not just a tool that the state uses to control people. It also controls itself. I mean, that's the whole point of having, I think, the type of society we have where states have power and the federal government has power, but also there's supposed to be some sort of balance. And then even within a state, within a municipality, the power of the government is not absolute and should always be checked by other means, whether it's by like the legislative power. We have the branches of government. The legislative is supposed to be challenged by the executive and the judicial, and vice versa. And with the legislative branches writing the laws, the executive branch is executing the laws, and the judicial branch, I guess, interpreting the laws. I don't know if that's the perfect word, but that's the whole point of explaining, basic thing that we all learn in third grade or something. But that's the point. So law is a part of all three branches of the government. Law is the foundation of government in some sense. So the thing with philosophy is I don't necessarily have time to get everyone's perspective on the issue. Okay, formal, procedural, and substantive requirements. Okay, formal aspects of the rule of law. Yeah, these are the 8 formal principles. This is probably what I was talking about earlier. Generality, publicity, prospectivity, intelligibility, consistency, practicability, stability, and congruence. They're formal because these principles concern the form of the norms that are applied to our conduct, the form of the laws, how they are put forward, not what, but how they are put forward and maintained, and so on. So laws need to be general. Obviously laws about black people in America needing to sit at the back of a bus is not general. It's discriminatory. Oh, interesting. Maybe I'm misunderstanding this. So what they're saying is actually that it can be more complicated. So the requirement that laws be general is purely a matter of form. It's compatible, actually, with discrimination. My mistake. So that's why you need to have all the principles at play, because you could say, okay, I guess they're saying even a norm like this, a person who is of African descent must sit in the back of any public bus that they ride on, applies universally to everyone. Okay, I see what they're saying. It technically is applying. It's applying to everyone, but only centering a particular small group of people. I guess it applies to anyone. It's just it only pertains to people of African descent. It's a formal requirement of generality, but it doesn't guarantee justice because it reflects the fact that justice and the rule of law work as separate criteria for evaluating a political system. Interesting. Okay. So yeah, just because I don't know, it's kind of complicated. It feels like a technicality, but I see what they're saying, that it's like you could say this law applies to everyone. It just only impacts people of African descent. So it's an example of how something can be technically meeting a principle of the rule of law without being a just law. And I would, assume that I don't know if there's a particular one of these formal aspects that pertain to why that's not just, but I mean, I could give my opinion on why it's not just. It feels arbitrary. I don't know which one of these it would apply to, though. Maybe we'll see. Of course, law cannot work without particular orders, but the generality requirement is usually taken to mean that the making of a particular law should be guided by open and relatively stable general rules that operate impersonally and impartially. The rule of law envisages law operating as a relatively stable set of norms available in public knowledge. Okay. We're going to get on to some more current situations to apply what we learned, but I want to get a little bit of background first. Laws must be public not only in the sense of actual promulgation, but actually in the sense of accessibility and intelligibility. Much modern law is necessarily technical, and the layperson will often require advice to what the law requires. And there have to be competent people to provide that advice, like Saul Goodman. Bentham criticized customary law in general and common law in particular for failing to satisfy this requirement. The sources of law were hidden in obscurity, and though there were spurious appeals to precedent, much of the law was just made up by the judges as they went along. That sounds problematic. So we have to complement the formal characteristics with a list of procedural principles as well, which are equally indispensable, that no one should have any penalty, stigma, or serious loss imposed upon them by government except as the upshot of procedures that involve a hearing by an impartial and independent tribunal that is required to administer existing legal norms on the basis of the formal presentation of evidence and argument, a right to representation by counsel at such a hearing, a right to be present to confront any question. So these are things that are, I believe, in the Constitution. A right to hear reasons from the tribunal when it reaches its decision, which are responsive to the evidence and arguments presented before it. Arguably, such procedural principles matter more in the ordinary person's conception of the rule of law than the formal criteria mentioned in the previous section. When people worried that the American detention facility in Guantanamo Bay from 2003 to the present was a black hole so far as legality was concerned, it was precisely the lack of these procedural rights that they were concerned about. So, when you talk about Guantanamo Bay, you're talking about issues related to the rule of law, obviously. I would say that the fact that it's not even within the territory of the United States is a major problem of that. And it's not within the territory of the United States so that folks who want to utilize Guantanamo Bay for their elite power schemes don't have to be subject to the laws of the country of the United States, which I think is bad. Right? I mean, that's a fundamental problem with the rule of law, to not have the government subject to its own laws. What the detainees demanded in the name of the rule of law was an opportunity to appear before a proper legal tribunal to confront and answer the evidence against them, such as it was, and to be represented that their own side of the story could be explained. A lot of people held without even charges for years at Guantanamo torture camp. Some procedural requirements are also institutional in character. There must be courts, there must be judges whose independence of the other branches of government is guaranteed. This side of the rule of law is connected with the constitutional principle of the separation of powers. That principle is sometimes justified simply on the ground that it is unhealthy for power to be institutionally concentrated in society. But it also has a rule of law justification in as much as it assigns distinct significance to distinct stages in the making and application of laws. Okay, let's get on to substantive theories. So we mentioned this briefly in earlier in the stream, like 4 hours ago. No, I'm sorry, like 10 minutes ago. How are we doing in the chat? Are we feeling good? Everyone in the chat, say hi to the people in the future. Be like, you should have been here. I hope you have FOMO. I hope you have FOMO. I feel like no one's ever said that expression. Okay, Some jurists believe that there's a special affinity between the rule of law and the vindication and support of private property. Okay, I'm a little skeptical about that, but okay, it's a substantive aspect of the rule of law to some people's minds, saying that a critical aspect of commitment to the rule of law, the definition and protection of property rights. I don't know. I'm not an expert in any of this stuff. Others like Richard Epstein, no relation, I assume, except that analytically the rule of law is a separate conception from private property. But they think nevertheless that a contingent connection between rule of law and private property can be established by showing that the forms of regulation defenders of private property are concerned about tend to be forms of regulation that the rule of law, even a more austere conception, prohibits. So basically denying the substantive necessity for private property being a fundamental part of the rule of law, but saying that it does make sense that the rule of law does protect private property based on other aspects of how the rule of law functions and maybe the role that private property plays in our societies. Again, you have to like read books about this stuff to get a deeper understanding, not like, watch some guy on a live stream. So it's also widely believed, though not necessarily by the same people who associate legality with property, that a system of positive law that fails to respect fundamental human rights should not be dignified with the term rule of law. That makes sense. For example, World Justice Project in 2011 quoted Arthur Chaskalson, former Chief Justice of South Africa, to this effect, saying, "The apartheid government, its officers and agents were accountable in accordance with the laws. The laws were clear, publicized, and stable, and were upheld by law enforcement officials and judges. What was missing was the substantive component of the rule of law. The process by which the laws were made was not fair. Only whites, a minority of the population, had the vote." Yeah, that's not fair. And the laws themselves were not fair. They institutionalized discrimination, vested broad discretionary powers in the executive, and failed to protect fundamental rights. Without a substantive content, there would be no answer to the criticism, sometimes voiced that the rule of law is an empty vessel into which any law can be poured. Hey, fair enough. It's not about glorifying the concept of the rule of law. It's about understanding the rule of law, and if there are limits to it, and it needs to be viewed with the substantive aspects to meet our goals of, human flourishing and safe societies where people are, better regulated in their actions, like, great. You base what you do on principles. You also base it on outcomes. It's you can't pick one. It's a balancing act, I think. Watch my Better Call Saul Part 2 for more thoughts on that, maybe. I forget what I said. Okay, so lots of different perspectives. The values of underlying the rule of law. Even if the principles of the rule of law are purely formal in their application, we don't just value them for formalistic reasons. Most fundamentally, people value the rule of law because it takes some of the edge off the power that is necessarily exercised over them in a political community. In various ways, being ruled through law means that power is less arbitrary, more predictable, more impersonal, less peremptory, less coercive even. It establishes what Fuller called a bond of reciprocity, a mutuality of constraint between the ruler and the ruled. And in that sense, it mitigates the asymmetry that political power otherwise involves. Rule of law establishes an environment that is conducive to liberty. Yeah, that makes sense. Move on. There may be no getting away from legal constraint in the circumstances of modern life, but freedom is possible nevertheless if people know in advance how the law will operate and how they have to act to avoid its application. Knowing in advance how... Okay, so yeah, we understand that. We understand that. We need a basis for expectation. All right, great. Opposition to the rule of law. No account of the rule of law is complete if it does not mention the ways in which this ideal is deprecated. Interesting. Okay, interesting. Oh, Carl Schmitt, the Nazi. What did he think? Interesting. Okay. He was a Nazi, right? I didn't make that up, right? Let me know in the chat. No, I'll just look it up. Carl Schmitt, Nazi. Carl Schmitt was a German jurist and political theorist. He held various positions on Nazi councils. Oh, I'm sorry. So am I just going to call someone a Nazi because they're on Nazi councils? Wow. Cancel culture. I just tried to do a cancel culture on this guy. Apparently, I can't. I just called him a Nazi only because he was on several Nazi councils. Wow, I'm very judgmental. Criticism by Plato has been the most enduring. From his perspective, which extolled the application of focused intelligence and insight by those in power, insistence upon the use of law and government was like a stubborn, stupid person who refuses to allow the slightest deviation from or questioning of his own rules, even if the situation has in fact changed and it turns out to be better for someone to contravene these rules. That seems like a short-sighted and kind of like narrow view of what we're even talking about. Also, like, isn't the whole idea of like Plato's Republic the idea that we should be ruled by like wise philosopher kings? Like, I don't give a fuck what Plato thought. Like, like we don't like. Okay, but yeah, I'm sure there's a mix of opinions from that time period and so on. So Plato was a poet. I don't know. He doesn't have to know how society should be run. No hate to poets. One would use echoes of the Platonic critique are also heard in those who privilege decisive executive decision making in times of crisis, especially if the crises seem to be successive and unending. Someone's will has to prevail, and it is said the rule of law does us no service by pretending that the element of will can be eliminated from politics. Okay, that's really not. I don't feel like that's a real understanding of what's going on. There are concerns about the mentality that is fostered by an excessive emphasis on the rule of law. In its most extreme form, the rule of law can have the effect of closing down the faculty of independent moral thought in the officials. Okay, I don't know about that. It just seems like it's such a broad concept. People can be talking about like quite different aspects of what the rule of law might mean. Sometimes it's important for the sake of clear and courageous moral judgment not to exaggerate the importance of something being required by law. Right. Sure, of course, but that's part of what we're looking at, of when laws can be wrong. This is not a matter of or when laws can be illegal. This is not a matter of legalizing the personal realm. It's also a matter of understanding, for example, the damage that can be done by relations between officials like social workers and vulnerable clients by bringing in rigid rules to replacing relatively informal professional norms. Interesting. I'm a social worker. I don't know. I mean, I guess there's room for black and white, and then there's room for gray in any profession. Some things are black and white. Some things are gray. I don't know why that's such a problem for the rule of law. Controversies about application. General debates, particular debates about the discretion. How far should it be the mission of the rule of law to eliminate or reduce the amount of discretion? Okay. Rules and systems. There's an element of respect for individuals' powers of discernment conveyed in the use of a standard. Okay, rather than a rule. Laws and social norms. Sometimes situations can be governed and disputes settled by informal social norms rather than by positive law. For sure, of course, yeah. It all depends. Emergencies, of course, rule of law. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, what comes to mind is like, just because I was talking about this with someone recently, is like Ukraine not having elections during wartime, which I'm sure many other countries, I believe the U.S. did as well during World War II. But, people could say, well, that's not legal to just like stop having elections, but it literally is legal. It's like part of their law that they do that, and it's supported by the population. So they're like, it's part of their law that they put other laws on hold, like having elections. And then if people didn't like that, then they could protest that it be changed, and it would ideally be changed. I understand that's like not a super in-depth look at it, but I'm a social worker. I'm just giving you my take on things. Okay, international law, which we'll get to more later, is very important, and it's tied up in this for me because, I mean, the rule of law makes you think about how laws function, which makes you think about how laws can be wrong, which makes you think about laws from one place to another. And also, how do we have international law? I don't know. I would imagine as bad as the international law system is right now, is it the best it's ever been? I feel like it's got to be the best it's ever been. I feel like you're more likely to get prosecuted for committing a war crime than ever. Probably. I mean, I don't know. It's still not great, obviously, but, Duterte's in custody. And, and I feel like there's other, ways that, like, I feel like we're on the up and up with international law. With the information age, with people just knowing more about what's going on. But it could be a lot better. The liberty of an individual state is not such an important value as the liberty of an individual person. It is not clear that national states need protection from international law and the power that it represents in the way that ordinary men and women need protection from the and non-binary people, the exercise of political power in society. That's interesting. Yeah, I could see that, certainly. But I also definitely see the importance of sovereignty of a state, so I don't know how they balance that. One additional, let's see. I cited your Better Call Saul essay in a research paper for my undergrad. That's amazing. Which one? It was an essay on really bad YouTubers and how they abuse people's trust. Just kidding. One additional point. It remains controversial whether international institutions themselves, like the UN, should be bound by the rule of law. No, it's not controversial to me. This odd, because these agents... Typo. Okay, typo. Typo alert. Typo alert. Get your shit together, Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. Okay, makes me want to stop reading. Finally, an analytic question. What is the relation between the rule of law and the concept of law? Yeah, I'm good. Okay, so that's Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. The typo. Sorry about the typo. I'm sorry on their behalf. Next up, we are going to look at, this is a website, AmericanBar.org. This is the American Bar Association. And we're going to look at what they say about the rule of law. What's their perspective on the rule of law? Let's see. Let's kind of fast forward to anything we might not know yet. You know what I mean? Because we're kind of becoming experts already. History. We know history. We know it's very difficult for a nation to maintain the rule of law if citizens do not respect the law. Assume that people... Right. And so this is how to make law more respectable. Assume that people in your community decided they didn't want to be... Okay, I get it. Rule of law functions because most of us agree it's important to observe the law. Okay. It's a little bit of a step down in sophistication. Judicial independence means that judges are independent from political pressures and influences when they make their decisions. An independent judiciary is essential to maintaining the rule of law. Jesus Christ, y'all. Does no one look at their own websites? Okay, I thought we were doing a rule of law stream. Apparently we're doing a nitpicking typos on website stream. Because come on, y'all. What's going on here? And then there's more. Judges should not be pressured. Okay, obviously what happened was someone scanned this. They did like some sort of scan. No, but then how would this have came up? Like, it feels like it was typed in, but it... Jesus Christ, guys. Judges should not be pressured by a political party or a private interest or popular opinion when they are called by... Yeah, I mean, look at how Clarence Thomas came up and the private interests have funded him, and I'm sure so many of these other corrupt judges. I mean, oh my God. It's horrible. It was a Wolves and Sheep essay. I think I'm saying the right person, right? Clarence Thomas, that Harlan Crow, or the person who funded Harlan Crow was funding Clarence Thomas. Is that right? Let me just check. Clarence Thomas, Harlan Crow. Yeah. Clarence Thomas belatedly discloses lavish travel expenses paid for by Harlan Crow. Yeah, look into this. It might make you worry a little bit. Hold on. Oops. I went to the wrong page for a second. Okay, so keeping the judiciary independent of these influences ensures that everyone has a fair chance to make their case in court and that judges will be impartial in making their decisions. They have to explain their decisions in public written opinions. Yeah, check out the shadow docket and how often the shadow docket's been used. Use in 2025. The shadow docket is a way that the Supreme Court in the United States avoids giving full explanations of what they're deciding and why. And you can look up the insane amount that it's been used. This is from BrennanCenter.org. Over the past few years, Supreme Court has dramatically expanded the use of its shadow docket. In its first 20 weeks, the second Trump administration made as many shadow docket applications, 19, that the Biden administration made over 4 years. And it's only gone up since then. It's lack of reasoning in most of the shadow docket rulings. So it's just, and this article is from, it's updated very recently. Okay. So since, all these shadow docket rulings going for the administration. So it's just something to look into. The shadow docket is a way that rule of law gets perverted because obviously this is the whole point. Like, we need to know about the reasoning for the decisions. It's important. It's for a paper discussing the wolf archetype in Better Call Saul. Your work was pretty useful in that, as you can guess. Hey, thank you so much. That's fucking insane and so cool. The idea that 5 years ago when I started my YouTube channel, people would be writing an essay and citing something I wrote, that's so cool. So judges must explain their decision. Supreme Court, blah blah blah. Okay, let's see. Martin Luther King Jr. Said, I submit that an individual who breaks a law that conscience tells him is unjust and who willingly accepts the penalty of imprisonment in order to arouse the conscience of the community over its injustice is in reality expressing the highest respect for the law. True. That's the whole point. People, we need law to be respectable. As this quote points out, and then U.S. Court of Appeals 2003 said neither laws nor the procedures used to create or implement them should be secret, and the laws must not be arbitrary. Okay, very interesting. All right, so what does the rule of law mean? What is this? What is this, a homework assignment? The World Justice Project has proposed a working definition of the rule of law that comprises 4 principles: a system of self-government in which all persons, including the government, are accountable under the law; system based on fair, publicized, broadly understood, and stable laws; a fair, robust, and accessible legal process in which rights and responsibilities based in law are evenly enforced; diverse, competent, and independent lawyers and judges. Very cool. Let's look at one of their questions for discussion. The World Justice Project asserts that the rule of law is the platform for communities of opportunity and equity and is essential to addressing the world's most persistent and harmful ills. Do you agree with the statement? Why or why not? I do agree with it because I think that the stability of the application of rules is necessary because we need to have we need accountability to grow as organisms, as social organisms. We need to know that our actions have consequences, but we need as much as possible to have that be predictable. And we also need other people to be held accountable. We need ourselves to be held accountable, and we need other people to be held accountable for the most maximum possible freedom and flourishing of people to do what they can, what they want to do. Okay, next up. This is a United States Courts, uscourts.gov page on the rule of law. Blah, 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 James Madison. U.S. Constitution is the nation's fundamental law. Yeah, I've heard of it. Federalist number 78 states further that if any law passed by Congress conflicts with the Constitution ought to be preferred to the statute. The intention of the people to the intention of their agents. Very interesting. The American democratic system is not always based upon simple majority rule, that's for sure. There are certain, and it can't always be based on that. There are certain principles that are so important to the nation that the majority has agreed not to interfere in these areas. For instance, the Bill of Rights was passed because concepts such as freedom of religion, speech, and equal treatment and due process of law were deemed so important that barring a constitutional amendment, not even a majority should be allowed to change them. Very important. And these are some substantive things that are put into laws to make it as just as possible and not just an empty shell. So, as we've learned, rule of law is a principle under which all persons, institutions, and entities, including the government, are accountable to laws that are publicly promulgated, equally enforced, independently adjudicated, and consistent with international human rights principles. That last one is very important and substantive, of course. Okay, that was a smaller website, so we get to go on to the next one. This is a Reuters article from May. Rule of law takes center stage at law school commencement. So law schools obviously had their graduation this summer, 5 months into an administration, the second Republican administration of President Donald Judicial Trump. And so just kind of an interesting article because it's showing about how apparently a bunch of speakers at the law school commencements condemned Republican President Donald Trump by name from the dais, saying, for example, like the Minnesota governor, Tim Walz, said stuff, but also other people. ACLU president Deborah Archer told Seattle University law graduates, "We are living at an inflection point in American history. Our democracy, our rights, and the systems we rely on to protect are under threat." Former U.S. President Beto O'Rourke said, today's law graduates must similarly push back against efforts to undermine the rule of law. So it's on people's minds. California Supreme Court Justice Goodwin Liu on May 12th told graduates at University of California College of Law, San Francisco, that is both a challenging and an important time to be a lawyer, saying the fate of democracy is in your hands, the fate of our democracy. Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison directly addressed Republican President Donald Trump from the commencement podium, saying to Suffolk University Law School graduates that the president is in the middle of bullying law firms into turning over their pro bono hours to him and revoking their security clearances because they took on clients that he perceives as enemies to himself. So that sentence is literally true. That is literally what's happened. And it's kind of shocking, but it really is wild to say that the mass bullying of major law firms, which, I don't care about their well-being and their feelings. I care about the abuse of executive power over non-governmental institutions or governmental institutions, but in this case, non-governmental institutions, specifically to make these law firms subservient to the president's interests, to the Republican Party's interests, but very much specifically to the president's interests, because they were working with clients that were perceived as enemies. It's really shocking. So the weaponization of the legal system is a term we see a lot because it shows or it represents going against the rule of law in such a key way, because the law is obviously, as we've talked about, supposed to be general, not used as a whim or just to serve one person's needs or wants, or okay, cool. And next up, we have UN. So, what is the rule of law according to the United Nations? For the UN, the rule of law is a principle of governance in which all persons, institutions, and entities, public and private, including the state itself, are accountable to laws that are publicly promulgated, equally enforced, and independently adjudicated, and which are consistent with international human rights norms and standards. So that's what we just saw. They're using the same definition, of course. Someone in the chat, did you see Vince saying that Trump would pardon Saul? So funny. I did see that. Yeah, that's I mean, that's true. Like it is interesting because you do see a lot of these pardons. And I'm a little bit copying Brandon from the Majority Report, who also has a podcast, The Discourse, because he made this point. It's like Trump really just seems to like respect crime. Like he just like respects crime. I mean, okay, probably more realistically, it's a rampant fear of the law being applied to himself. So it's like he's trying to set the standard of like laws being whimsical. He's trying to set the standard so that he will be pardoned by future, by Tucker Carlson in 10 years or something like that. President Tucker Carlson or something like that. So but it's also, there is a love of the game for sure, where he would just like kind of like game recognize game, of like, people just committing crimes kind of like gets him off or something. But yeah, more realistically, it's probably just selfishly wanting to like establish a system where laws are not respected. I mean, look at what I talk about in my message to people leaving MAGA video, like, which is all about law and justice. And it's all about how Trump became famous. I mean, he was a little prince boy from New York with his landlord daddy, a slumlord landlord daddy, who, so he was like this rich little prince boy. But then he became famous, with his whole thing of saying that these 5 young people, I think children, actually 5 children, should be given the death penalty, and for a crime they didn't commit, which he never apologized for. And so it's like this idea, and then, people think that if they focus on strength and violence, that it makes up for not understanding justice. But like at the end of the day, like the more sort of like vicious something is, it does not correlate with how just it is. The rule of law is fundamental to international peace and security. I like international peace and security. Any other international peace and security enjoyers in the chat? Comment below. To achieve economic and social progress and development, and to protect people's rights and fundamental freedoms, it's foundational to people's access to public services, curbing corruption, and restraining the abuse of power. Yeah, corruption's a great word because it's something everyone hates. And it's sometimes easier to, talk with like a Republican or like a centrist apologist type about corruption. So rather than about the rule of law being disrespected. Because it's just a little bit less abstract. You don't have to go into Aristotle and Bentham. Okay, Goal 16 is an enabling goal for member states to generate national level policy changes that advance progress on other SDGs. Goals, I assume, development goals, sustainable development goals. Rule of law involves, there's a clip. I don't want to watch a clip. We're trying to do a boring stream here. Strengthening the rule of law involves respect for the norms of international law, including the use of force, recognition of the primary responsibility of states to protect their populations from genocide, crimes against humanity, ethnic cleansing, and war crimes. The rule of law is a core element of the humanitarian human rights agendas. It is crucial to understanding and addressing the reasons for displacement and statelessness, and is foundation of the humanitarian protection regime. I mean, yeah, like Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza haven't been able to vote for 2 decades, is my understanding. I could be slightly off on that, but that's my understanding. And that's just one aspect of their disenfranchisement, and as far as like the United States, I mean, right now, like the United States has violated international law for many, many years. And this is part of why the United States never ratified the International Criminal Court Constitution or whatever it's called. We never joined the ICC. We're going to talk about the ICC in a moment. We never joined the ICC because when it was 2001 or 2002 or something, and we were getting ready to commit war crimes in Iraq, and all around the Middle East. But like the United States has committed so many war crimes, like there should be a lot of accountability in store. And I really do hope for that. I really hope for, whether it's Democrats, Republicans, Green Party, I don't give a shit. I want people to be held accountable for their crimes, for their war crimes. And right now we're seeing this current Republican administration just murdering people in the Pacific and in the Caribbean. Like, that's not debatable. Like, they are murdering people. They're telling us they're murdering people. That's not okay. If they're drug traffickers, you can't just murder drug traffickers, right? I mean, you can't just murder right? Can I get a amen about that? Like, you can't just murder drug traffickers. That's what Duterte is being held for. Like, you can't just murder drug traffickers. You can't just murder terrorists. But they're completely different populations. Drug traffickers and terrorists. They're completely different populations. But you can't murder terrorists. You can't just go murder terrorists. I mean, Israel just violated the quote-unquote ceasefire for the millionth time by sending a munition into... It was Gaza, right? And they just murdered a guy. Oh, he's the leader of Hamas. Okay. You can't do that. You can't do that. That's not how law works. I do think if there's concrete evidence of someone planning an imminent attack, imminent and concrete being key words there, then maybe you can do something. But imminent is a key word there. No, you can't just kill someone for being a terrorist. You can't just kill someone for being a terrorist. That's not how rule of law works. Obviously, the problem then becomes the government just throws around the word terrorist. Like, every government does this. They just throw around the word terrorist. You know, every government that is really off the deep end with the rule of law. All right, let's talk about the ICC. What's the International Criminal Court? Now, if you're thinking, well, I don't like the idea of international law. It seems kind of woke. You know what I mean? It seems kind of woke. It seems it's a little cliche. If that's your perspective, I hear you and I see you and I feel you. I literally feel you. But I think it's kind of nice to have law. I do think law is kind of nice. And I think that the world is a place, is kind of my perspective on that. Like, like when you leave the country you live in, there's more place. You know what I mean? There's further place beyond where you live. So why should laws not exist in that place outside of your home country? Should there be laws that apply to international waters? Or should it just be like pirate times? Sorry, I know pirates still exist. Should there be laws that apply to space? Should there be laws that apply to areas that no one has possession of? Where you live, should there be laws that apply to public areas? Or if someone kills you in a park, there's no law that applies to it because they weren't at your home and they weren't at their home? No. I think there should be laws that apply to the park as well. Just like there should be laws that apply to the international waters, to space, or to how one country interfaces with another. So personally, it's not very controversial to me. I think we should have laws. We should have international criminal courts because there needs to be laws in the world, because the world is a place. So this is from April. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu begins a 4-day visit to Hungary on Thursday, defying an international criminal court arrest warrant. So the ICC obviously has arrest warrants for Netanyahu, for like a Hamas leader or two, for other people in the Zionist ethnic state that have been committing war crimes demonstrably. And so the ICC, let's learn about the ICC, because it's very important. And the way that the U.S. has not engaged with the ICC and refused to become a part of it gives you an insight into the role of the United States in the world as basically the evil empire, for lack of a better word. Court was established in 2002 to prosecute war crimes, crimes against humanity, genocide, and the crime of aggression when member states are unwilling or unable to do so themselves. It can prosecute crimes committed by nationals of member states or on the territory of member states by other actors. It has 125 member states, the courts not including the U.S. Obviously, the U.S. is not a part of it. The court's budget for 2025 is about 195 million euros. The ICC is conducting investigations. This was back in April, so it might not be up to date. From the Palestinian territories to Ukraine and African states such as Uganda, Democratic Republic of the Congo, and Congo and Kenya, to Venezuela and Latin America and Myanmar and the Philippines and Asia. It says there have been 32 cases before the court, with some having more than one suspect. ICC judges have issued at least 60 arrest warrants. ICC judges have issued 11 convictions and 4 acquittals. 21 people have been held in ICC detention center in The Hague and have appeared before the court, and 31 people remain at large, including the leader of the Zionist ethnic state of Israel. Charges have been dropped against 7 people due to their deaths. I guess you can't really convict someone after they die because they escape justice. Of the 11 convictions, only 6 have been for the court's core crimes of war crimes and crimes against humanity. The others were for crimes such as witness tampering. Still a crime. The 6 convicted men were all African militia leaders from Democratic Republic of Congo, Mali, and Uganda. Terms range from 9 to 30 years in prison. Maximum possible term is life imprisonment. Duterte was arrested on March 11th, accused of forming and arming death squads held responsible for the killings of thousands of perceived drug users and dealers during his rule. Duterte has said he takes full responsibility for the war on drugs as he braces for the legal battle. Right, so you can't just kill people in a drug war, is a lesson to take away from that. Also, notable ICC suspects are Netanyahu, who is accused of being criminally responsible for acts including murder, persecution, and using starvation as a weapon of war in the Gaza conflict, the genocide of the Palestinian people. Russian President Vladimir Putin accused of the war crime of illegally deporting hundreds of children from Ukraine. That sounds like human trafficking to me. Both Israel and Russia have repeatedly denied their forces have committed atrocities in Gaza. So this is part of why, I don't want to say evil because it really is not useful, but this is part of why countries that don't respect the rule of law often tend to support one another, because it's like a mutually assured destruction thing, or like their fates are tied together. If the United States stopped supporting Israel and stopped supporting Netanyahu to not be held responsible for his crimes, it would absolutely necessitate United States officials, from Blinken to Biden to Trump to Rubio to Hegseth, former Weekend Fox News host. It would necessitate that they be prosecuted. And you actually see people saying this explicitly. There was a clip recently, I forget who it was. I don't think it was like Lindsey Graham, it was someone else, that specifically it might have been Huckabee. Yeah, it might have been Huckabee. And it's specifically tied together, like, obviously we'd need to prosecute U.S. Officials if we prosecuted Israeli officials. And it's like, yes. Okay. Although the court is supported by many UN members and the European Union, other countries such as the United States, China, and Russia are not members, arguing the ICC could be used for politically motivated prosecutions. It's literally like if the mayor of your town was like, we're no longer going to have laws here because they could be political. So U.S. is not a member. Myanmar is not a member, but in 2018 and 2019, judges ruled that the court had jurisdiction over alleged cross-border crimes that partially took place in neighboring ICC member Bangladesh, such as deportation and persecution, and said prosecutors could open a formal investigation. The Zionist ethnic state of Israel is not a member and does not recognize its jurisdiction, but the Palestinian territories were admitted to the ICC as a member state in 2015. This, together with ruling by judges, means the court can look at potential war crimes carried out by Hamas fighters in Israel and by Israelis in the Gaza Strip. Philippines is not currently a member of the ICC, but was between 2011 and 2019 when the unilateral withdrawal by Duterte became final. Under the court's founding in 1998 Rome Statute, even if a state withdraws as a member, it retains jurisdiction over crimes within its jurisdiction committed during the membership period. In February 2025, U.S. Republican President Donald Trump authorized economic and travel sanctions targeting people who work on international criminal court investigations of U.S. citizens or U.S. allies, such as Israel. The president targeting the International Criminal Court members for trying to enforce international law. And I'm not even trying to be like anti-Trump, because this is a U.S. problem. This is a U.S. problem. The Democrats should feel ashamed. Like, I don't know, how much have the Democrats really pushed to join the ICC? Like, it's insane. Like, wouldn't Obama be committed of war crimes too? Like, of course. Like, I don't know, like, what the ICC probably doesn't, like, get out of bed for every single, like, drone strike that kills civilians. But, like, at a certain point, I would hope that they would prosecute someone like Obama. Chief Prosecutor Karim Khan has so far been the only ICC staff member targeted by sanctions, which was, okay, this is old article, so I don't know what the up-to-date information on that is. Very interesting. So that was our preliminary part of this live stream. How are we feeling? How are we doing? How's everyone's feelings right now? How's your emotions and your feelings? And how's your body? You know what I mean? How are you feeling physically? Are you tense? Are you feeling relaxed? Are you aware that I'm stalling? You know what I mean? Lots of different questions I'm curious about. And you can answer them right now in the chat while I don't stall. So, rule of law, I'm starting to think there's something to be said for this rule of law thing. But we've only really been scratching the surface so far because we've just doing the theory. We've been doing the theory, okay? But it's time that we've looked at some examples, some real life examples, but let's look at some more. You know what I mean? I'd like to look at a few more examples to really apply these concepts to try to understand what does it look like for the rule of law to be working, to not be working, to be in practice, to not be in practice. Thank you to everyone still watching, I guess. I don't really, it doesn't make a huge difference, but I appreciate your time and attention. And, yeah. I just think this is really important. Like, I really, it's so important. Part of the reason I posted, I was like, oh, are you pro-fascism, anti-fascism, neutral towards fascism in my recent community post? I just want people to be engaged. I want people to know that their perspective does matter because, like, the world goes to shit more when there's a bunch of people who don't care or feel disenfranchised, more than just, like, few bad people doing bad things. Like, it's what's really necessary for most of us to feel empowered, like our opinions matter, our thoughts matter about what's going on in the world and about the degree of rule of law taking place. So now we're going to look at, this is an article, and it's been a while. I've been putting this stream together for many months, to be honest. So I actually don't remember, like, it'll take me a second when I pull up a source to remember exactly what the point of it was, but it'll be pretty clear. I mean, the point is to talk about rule of law, but so this first thing is called The Pillage of Iraq. It is an article by Ghali Hassan from July 7th, 2004. And I just highlighted one passage that I want to look at. It says, Robert Fisk observed a pattern in U.S. response to looting. This is talking about looting. Well, so invading forces pillaged Iraq's cultural heritage, okay, and fueled the pillaging. The destruction of ancient towns and cities in Iraq, serving Western propaganda and stereotypes against the Iraqi people by saying, oh, look at these people just destroying their own country. They must need us to administer their life for them. Veteran Middle East correspondent Robert Fisk witnessed the pillage himself and wrote, after days of arson and pillage, here's a short but revealing scorecard. U.S. troops have sat back and allowed mobs to wreck and then burn the Ministry of Planning, Ministry of Education, Ministry of Irrigation, Ministry of Trade, Ministry of Industry, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ministry of Culture, and Ministry of Information. They did nothing to prevent looters from destroying priceless treasures of Iraq's history in the Baghdad Archaeological Museum and in the Museum of the Northern City of Mosul. So this is during a U.S. invasion, U.S. troops not maintaining the law. because it serves their own interests. So Fisk observed a pattern in U.S. response to looting, saying the Americans have, though, put hundreds of troops inside 2 Iraqi ministries that remain untouched and untouchable, because tanks and armored personnel carriers and Humvees have been placed inside and outside both institutions. And which ministries proved to be so important for the Americans? Why, the Ministry of Interior, of course. Sorry, I just lost this for a second. Ministry of Interior, of course, with its vast wealth of intelligence information on Iraq, and the Ministry of Oil. The archives and files of Iraq's most valuable asset, its oil fields, and even more important, its massive reserves, are safe and sound, sealed off from the mobs and looters and safe to be shared, as Washington almost certainly intends with American oil companies. The Americans had no... This is what happens when the state is completely bought out by private industry. The state either serves the interests of the elite or it serves the interests of the average people. Can't do both. You know, you can do both partially, but sometimes you got to choose. The Americans had no concerns for the looting, and U.S. troops had an order not to take action against the looting. The pervasive and systematic lawlessness underpinning the occupation of Iraq is no accident. The neoconservatives in Washington understand that the rule of law stands as an obstacle to unleashing the full force of the U.S. war machine, writes Roger Norman of the Center for Economic and Social Rights. So I just thought this was an interesting example of how the state can intentionally put forward a system of lacking rule of law during an invasion, specifically to serve its own interests. And it's very selective when the state chooses to exert control. And specifically, creating a system of lacking rule of law can sometimes be to the powerful folks' advantage if it sends a particular message they're trying to send, or if it's just a net easier thing for them to do. But in this case, they know that if, like, that's the thing, like, you have to, I always try to think about this, and I'm not by no means going to be the best person to explain this, but, like, just think about a random country. The more democratic it is, the more that elites are not able to corruptly control the country, the more responsive the government is to the people, the more that rule of law is stable and in effect, the less easy it is for outside countries and multinational corporations to exploit the resources of that country, because more people will have a say in what goes on. And you can't pay off the whole population. You can pay off the elites, but you can't pay off the whole population. Okay, next up on examples of rule of law or lack of rule of law. This is an article from July of this year. U.S. citizen told you have no rights during immigration arrest speaks out, saying it hurts me. So this is a U.S. citizen, by the way, non-citizens, and people who are illegally present in a country, residents, also have rights. Key point. But this is a U.S. citizen, so they have even more rights, I guess. 18 years old, still has braces. This is a citizen we're talking about, an 18-year-old. Being violently arrested in Florida back in May of this year under the Republican administration. We've obviously always had violent arrests of residents in our country under Democratic administrations too. And that's part of the failure of liberal democracy and the leading to this situation we're in right now, is that we need to have, good systems that most people like so that charlatans can't come in and pretend they're going to fix a broken system. I mean, it was pretty obviously pretend, but, people get fooled pretty easily. So this is an 18-year-old U.S. citizen, Kenny Lainez, a high school senior, violently arrested in Florida by Gestapo goons who were just following orders. Immigration agents, Border Patrol, and Florida Highway Patrol agents. I love this phrase when they say illegal immigrant crackdowns. You see this a lot. or the word illegal being in a sentence, because it often is grammatically confusing. I'm just a nitpicky guy, because it actually makes it sound like the immigration crackdowns are illegal, which often they are. They literally are. We have judges ruling, oh, that's illegal. You can't do that. So in a video recorded of the arrest, an officer, a United States Border Patrol and Florida Highway Patrol officers told him, a U.S. citizen who was born and raised in the country, you got no rights here. You're an amigo, brother. The car was pulled over for having too many people sitting in the front seat. 2 passengers were undocumented, according to Lainez, and officers are seen in the video using a taser. The teen's 2 coworkers were both detained, and Lainez says he has been unable to contact them. We're not resisting. We're not committing any crime to, run away. Phone continued recording after he was detained, capturing an exchange in which an officer tells another, they're starting to resist more. We're going to end up shooting some of them. Now, keep in mind that officers have shot many people this year, including in Chicago. Border Patrol officers, Chicago's quite far from the border, to be honest. It's actually not that close to the border at all. But Border Patrol officers in Chicago, a specific Border Patrol officer in Chicago, shot a woman, Marimar Martinez, a U.S. citizen, 7 times with 5 bullets, then bragged about it in a group chat to his other Just Following Orders goons, and then fled with the vehicle from Chicago all the way to Maine to hide the evidence of him driving into this woman's vehicle by getting the car buffed out. This has all been revealed in court. The U.S. tried to then charge Marimar Martinez with crimes that they had to then drop because it was obvious it was bullshit. But that was Border Patrol agents shooting a U.S. citizen. She was not doing anything violent towards them. They dropped the charges pretending she was doing something violent towards them. So when they say we're going to end up shooting some of them, that's actually very likely in a lot of these situations. Another officer replies, just remember, you can smell that too with a $30,000 bonus. The statement made by the government did not even mention that a U.S. citizen has been detained. Director at the Guatemala Maya Center, an advocacy group that opposes Florida's new illegal operation, said laws are just like not being respected. They're no longer being upheld. Deputizing these agents so quickly is going to bring severe consequences. Oh, yeah. So that's the reality. And I hope Republicans and centrists enjoy reality and facing reality. I think facing reality is very healthy. And this is the reality. As an 18-year-old U.S. citizen, just because he had 2 people who are undocumented in his car, being told he has no rights because he's an amigo and they might have to shoot him or his friends. I hope you feel bad when you think about that. You should. We should all feel bad when we think about this. It's healthy to feel bad sometimes. Trust me. Next up on real-life examples of rule of law or lack of rule of law, New York shooting unlikely to prompt U.S. Congress to tighten gun controls. Now I know. What shooting is this? There's so many shootings. What shooting is this? I already forgot about it, right? Is what you're thinking. This was the guy who walked into a skyscraper in Manhattan with an assault rifle and killed people. 4 people. Nothing even happens. I'm working on a video about mass shootings because I want to make a much more exhaustive statement about it. It's a public health crisis. So it's just interesting that no sign of the Republican-controlled U.S. Congress seeking tougher controls on guns. It's just interesting that we just suffer and we don't even try to make it better. Like, in what world would you ever do that? Imagine, like, not trying to make things better when there's people dying and suffering needlessly. So gun rights are enshrined in the Constitution, right? So it's like, how, in a rule of law way, do you respect the Constitution while tightening gun controls? Well, it's actually extremely open to interpretation what the Second Amendment specifically pertains to. It does not have to necessarily pertain to all types of guns in all types of situations with no regulations. People much more well-versed on law than I am debate this. And this is something I'll go into in the mass shootings video. In fact, the Republicans' bill from July eased a century-old tax on gun silencers known as suppressors and short-barrel rifles. So it's important to the Republicans to have more guns silently able to kill people. When Democrats last had majorities in Congress and held the White House, the first significant gun control legislation in nearly 30 years was enacted in 2022, with some Republican support, because, by the way, gun owners and Republicans support much more strict laws than are currently in place. The government is just not being responsive to the people. How many people have to be shot? How many children have to die? We're so desensitized. They want us to be so desensitized to murder. They want us to just think it's normal to murder people. You got our government murdering people. Why the fuck wouldn't boys go shoot people when they see their government murdering people? It's crazy that our government just goes around murdering people. So sad, man. 84% of Americans supported extending background checks for all firearms purchases. 61% of Americans said it's too easy to legally obtain a gun. 58% favor stricter gun laws. 66% want a ban on high-capacity ammunition magazines. Who the fuck needs a high-capacity ammunition magazine? Give me a goddamn break. Give me a goddamn break. You think the freaking writers of the Constitution wanted every person to have a high-capacity ammunition magazine? Are you stupid? Like, are you fucking stupid? Chuck Schumer, stop talking. Stop talking. You didn't say one thing about specific legislation. Stop talking. Shut your mouth. This happened in your state and you have nothing to say. Step down. So I guess I just look at this to say, I mean, this, like, the laws are not responsive to the people, right? I guess that's sort of the point of this article, is not just to feel bad, but it's like the laws are not responsive to what we want the laws to be. So how do we make the laws more responsive to the people? How do we take corruption out of the government to a more significant extent so that laws can be more responsive? All right, next example. Republican President Donald Trump's moves towards taking over Washington are unprecedented. Here's what the law says. So this is the president's attempts to federalize the city of Washington, D.C., taking command of the police department, deploying the National Guard under laws and constitutional powers that give the federal government more sway over the nation's capital than other cities. Its historically majority black population wasn't electing its own city council and mayor until 1973. They mention that it's majority black because that's part of the oppression, is like the government not wanting to give power to minority groups to rule themselves and to have control over their own lives. The measure is still less significant power in D.C. and to the president and Congress, though no president has exercised the police powers before. Republican President Donald Trump activated the National Guard, administered, Okay, legal battles, obviously, in all these cities about the authority to deploy federal agents under these circumstances. Appeals court has so far refused to intervene. Yeah, and it's gone back and forth since then. Like, appeals court said they had to leave D.C., then said another one said they didn't. Same with, like, Los Angeles. It's a little hard to follow all the back and forth, and it's just going to go to the Supreme Court in every case, I feel like. But it's just very interesting from a rule of law perspective, right? You have the executive of the federal branch influencing the police in a municipality. Like, think about all the levels of government being stepped over in that process. Like, wouldn't you want the federal government to intervene as little as possible? And only when absolutely necessary. DC has like the lowest crime rate in like 30 years that it's had. So Section 740 of the Home Rule Act allows for the president to take over Washington's Metropolitan Police Department for 48 hours with possible extensions to 30 days during times of emergencies. No president has done so before. Republican President Donald Trump cited these specific incidents to try to justify it. The law is specific to DC. Okay, so yeah, interesting. Okay, just something to think about there. Next up on examples, some Florida officers are continuing to charge people under halted immigration laws. So it's just very interesting to think about a state actually using halted laws and enforcing laws that are no longer in effect. A federal judge halted enforcement of the law while it's challenged in court. This is back in August. But people were still arrested and charged under the law. So as punishment for flouting the judge's order and being found in civil contempt, the judge required Florida Attorney General James Uthmeyer to file bi-monthly reports about whether any arrest, detentions, or law enforcement actions. So it's just really fascinating. A judge telling an attorney general, stop breaking the law by enforcing laws that you're not allowed to enforce because they're not laws. They're not laws. The men were each charged with driving without a valid license and offenses related to driving under the influence of alcohol. You don't have to defend these people to care about the rule of law, by the way. It's defending the rule of law. That's the point. The state attorney's office for the 12th Judicial District dismissed the illegal entry charges against them and requested that the sheriff's office advise, not advice, come on, the arresting officer of the court's order halting enforcement of the law, according to the status report. People saying, well, how many other people are being held under these laws that are not legitimate? Okay, very interesting. So how are we doing so far? Lots of interesting stuff, right? I feel like we're having a great and good time. I'm going to take a 2-minute break, load up some more examples, go to the bathroom, take a break, drink some water. Y'all, I'll see you in a couple minutes. If you're watching in the future, just fast forward or listen to the beats that are about to come on that I make. You can listen to more music I make at bandcamp.com/whatstherapy or something. I don't know how they do the links there. Maybe it's like whatstherapy.bandcamp.com. Or you could check out the Patreon where I do stuff or become a member. Okay, see you in a few minutes. Hey, how's it going? How was your break? Oh my god, how was your break? Did you have a good break? I had a great break. You know what I mean? I went to the bathroom, I got some more water. Mmm. And yeah, and I kind of just had an amazing break. I refreshed myself, you know what I mean? I just like feel so alive now. So that was really needed. So thanks for giving me that time off. I really appreciate it. I won't ever do that again today. Um, so what's going? I'm just looking. I'm looking at the chat a little bit. Someone said, "No, I lost the stream like a while ago." So I'm sorry about that. I don't know what you're referring to. Someone said, "Do you think one criteria for the rule of law is that it needs to be readily enforceable?" Yeah, yeah. I think that was one of them. It might not have called it enforceable, but it was like, yeah. There was another word used earlier. It was like practicable or something, or yeah, I don't know if that meant the same thing, but yeah, you definitely have to be able to enforce the law to a certain extent. But like, yeah, you have to have a mechanism to enforce the law. Yeah, I think that's incredibly important. Yeah, so when like a president fires like 17 inspectors general, you know, who can no longer like hold him accountable. Okay, that's not the best example of enforcement. That's more of like holding someone accountable. But they're probably not enforcing the law. But yeah, in a million different ways, like the law is enforced through so many different people, and they need to be able to function, or else absolutely there's no law. I mean, you can't get rid of the enforcers of the law any more than you can get rid of the writers of the law or the interpreters of the law. So, okay. Well, let's we have a bunch more examples to look at of law being a bit more complicated than we might think sometimes. So here's an article from August. Woman arrested in Omaha meatpacking plant raid sues over detention despite judge's release order. Oh, did I unplug that? Okay, that's fine. So brings to at least 4 the number of cases where someone detained in a raid earlier this year at an Omaha meat packer claimed they are being held despite a judicial order they be released on bond. So the government is denying a judge's order, and the government's saying we're enforcing the law, but the government's actually breaking the law. So this is the problem, and this is why I'm talking about this. It's just fascinating that people can break the law in their enforcement of the law. Like people can think, they can legitimately think, or they can pretend to think that they are enforcing the law, and they can be breaking the law by doing that. So this is Sabina Carmona Lorenzo, 48-year-old, says an immigration judge granted her release on bond, but she's still being held with her freedoms taken away for over 2 months. You ever been in prison for 2 months? You know what these facilities are like? You ever been in prison for 2 months? I haven't. You want to know how much of a life-changing experience? You think I'm pissed off now? Like, previously, most individuals subject to removal proceedings who are found to not be at risk to the community could be released on bond. She says, I hope God gives me an opportunity to stay with my family and see my children graduate. I do not ask for anything else but to remain in the country to experience what I have worked so hard to accomplish for my children. So ICE appears to be relying on a novel interpretation of its policy on allowing non-citizens to be released on bond, now saying that only those already admitted to the U.S. can be released from custody during removal proceedings, and everyone else is mandatorily detained under U.S. code. But that may not be the case. Senior U.S. District Judge issued an order to show cause requiring defendants to demonstrate within 3 business days why a writ of habeas corpus should not be granted. She was ordered released, and there have been several similar lawsuits. Plaintiffs in all 4 cases have had no previous legal troubles. It's just not right. It's just not right. It's just not right. Next example. Judge rules former Trump lawyer Alina Habba was unlawfully appointed as U.S. attorney. Yeah, there's been even more developments in this. So, like, they're literally appointing attorneys unlawfully. It's happened in several cases. Her only qualification is that she is white and likes Donald Trump, or is willing to pretend she does, because she has no moral compass. But we're not here to talk about morality, though. We're here to talk about legality. U.S. District Judge concluded that Alina Habba is not lawfully performing the functions and duties of the Office of the U.S. Attorney for the District of New Jersey. Again, you don't have to take the side of the defendants in an illegal drug case. You can, but you don't have to say, I think the attorney should be legally appointed. Habba's actions can be declared void, including her approval of the indictment of defendant Cesar Humberto Pina. So, yeah. It's just important to understand attorneys can even be put forward wrongfully and illegally under Pam Bondi and similar loyalists. William Barr, disgusting people with no moral compass who will be who shame their family and friends through their actions. Next example. Exclusive. Department of Justice blocks use of justice grants for legal aid to migrants in U.S. illegally. You see what I'm saying now about the word illegally? It seems like it has a double meaning here. I think they're referring to the migrants, but they easily could be referring to the blocking of the use of justice grants. I think I actually saved this because I thought it meant the other one. But this has actually been ruled illegal since this. So I saved this for this live stream because I misinterpreted the headline, because I thought it was referring to the blocking being illegal, but this is actually grants, migrants, justice, illegal. This has actually been subsequently ruled illegal, I believe. Let me just see. Oh, it's going to be hard to find quickly. Let's see. Hold on. Let me see if I could. There's just Justice Department. Yeah, I wish I did actually have this on hand for right now. Because I actually think this came up, like, on the podcast, on the Verbal Journal podcast. I feel like we just talked about this. Let me see if I can find it. Grants. It would just have the word grants. Okay. Justice grants. My gender. Oh, okay. No, this was different. This is different. But this is relevant enough. Well, okay, let me give you 3 examples of what I'm talking about. How's everyone doing while I stall? And if you're watching this in the future, you can still answer. You can still tell me how you're doing. You know what I mean? So here's a few examples of similar things, denying of grants being illegal. Even though I misinterpreted the headline here. Republican President Donald Trump denying grants to artists over gender ideology violated First Amendment, judge rules. This is a judge ruling that a policy adopted to implement an executive order Republican President Donald Trump signed was unlawful and violated the free speech protections of the U.S. Constitution's First Amendment. So Republicans love to pretend that they like free speech, but they don't. They hate it. Judge blocks Republican President Donald Trump from cutting $350 million in grants to cities and counties. Unless they support federal immigration enforcement, ended programs that support diversity, and stop providing benefits to immigrants, another word for people, who are in the country illegally. So this was another federal judge blocking an executive motion to deny grants that were probably already promised to cities and countries on the basis of spurious reasoning. And a third example, federal judge rules Republican President Donald Trump's administration cannot put conditions on domestic violence grants. They wanted to bar groups from promoting diversity, equity, or inclusion or providing abortion resources, or else they wouldn't get help combating domestic violence. Disgusting. Pathetic and disgusting. All right. So some examples of executive orders being illegal. Next on the examples segment here, Republican President Donald Trump moves to ban flag burning despite Supreme Court ruling that Constitution allows it. So the Constitution allows burning the flag. Or more specifically, the Constitution does not give the government the right to make burning the flag illegal. The Constitution doesn't say, hey, go burn a flag. It doesn't say it's okay to burn a flag. It just does not allow the government to ban burning of the flag. Nonetheless, we see this goon, this fucking loser, who so many pathetic people think is less of a loser than he is because they have issues with authority that they've never resolved in therapy. But he tried to say, actually, the Supreme Court and the Constitution are wrong, and my daddy says that it's that I'm right about this one. So, constitutional scholars question both the legality and the merit of this action. The government cannot prosecute protected expressive activity. I mean, how do you like not feel pathetic supporting this guy? You know what I mean? Like, how do you just not feel like the biggest loser ever supporting this guy? Well, they all go, well, I don't support him. I just vote for him and don't criticize him, but I don't support him. That would be like, no, I don't do that. I don't look in the mirror either or go to therapy. Okay. So, okay. Constitutional law. Next up, just 38% of Americans support Republican President Donald Trump's use of troops to police D.C. This is a bit of an old poll. Get out of the bike lane, guys. What the fuck are you doing? So just interesting, worth pointing out, like these policies based around abuse of executive authority are not necessarily the most popular. Judges, defense lawyers, and grand jurors poke holes in cases from Republican President Donald Trump's D.C. federal investigation. And we did just see, so I'm doing this live stream in December. We did just see, like, this week, the demotion of someone involved in the D.C. crackdown with this autocracy because they, I guess, didn't do a good enough job. We obviously have former Fox News host and avid alcohol drinker Jeanine Pirro leading the D.C. prosecutions, doing a very poor job, but you get what you pay for with loyalists. Anyway, so yeah, a lot of failed indictments, and it's very rare for grand juries to not indict when the government tries to indict someone. So it is just interesting to see how many holes were poked. District judge said, "I've seen things over the past 72 hours I've never seen in a federal court. It feels like some sort of bizarre nightmare." That's a district judge. Civil liberties are at stake, legal figures say. And I don't mean Trump stakes. Look that up if you don't know what that is. The dude was such a loser. He had all these random companies. He's like a total snake oil salesman charlatan. It's like pathetic. Everyone knew. We've all known this. Basically, nothing that's happened in either Trump presidency has been really surprising if you had total information and paid attention to what was out there. We're still going to be surprised sometimes. We're human beings. We have emotional reactions. But realistically, everything has been the Republican plan for a long time, ramped up a bit with the MAGA take on things. But, all this stuff is fairly cut and dry at what they've been wanting to do for a very long time. So, 25-year-old recent college graduate with a permit to carry a concealed firearm spent 8 days in jail after police stopped his car and said they found his registered gun and 20 ounces of marijuana and drug paraphernalia. But that I don't think would normally be in federal court. Oh, and the cases where drug dealers register their guns are exceptionally rare. That's interesting. So, people are not held based on assumptions. They're held based on evidence, right? This is an architect who doesn't have a criminal record. So a lot of these cases getting thrown out. City's police department says crime rates have plunged in the district. Oh, great. Let's just send federal units to every single city all the time because that's how we'll tackle crime. Meanwhile, DC already had plummeting crime rates from last year and from the last few decades. Yeah, the pardoning of all the Jan 6 people is a huge violation of the rule of law. Yeah, people just, people with years and years of experience have never seen a grand jury refuse to return an indictment. And it's happened several times in D.C. with their bullshit indictments. Okay, so just something to think about. People being locked up for days for relatively minor offenses that typically aren't handled in a district court. Okay, next up on examples. National Guard illegally performed law enforcement in LA, judge rules. So this has gone back and forth, obviously, all these different judges and so on. But again, another headline about what we've been talking about. So obviously we've seen these murders taking place in international waters. The U.S. government is becoming even more murderous than ever. We're just killing people. Your tax dollars, my tax dollars, if you're a U.S. person, if you're a U.S. resident, because even non-citizens pay taxes, obviously. They pay taxes on so much of the things they buy, and they don't get a lot of the benefits of that. They get some depending on where they live, but our tax dollars are going towards this. We are responsible for this to a certain extent. So our country is just going around murdering people, and it's illegal. This article says the Venezuelan vessel because it's from September 4th. This has now been done 10, 15 more times. It just happened 3 times this past week or something like that. Just murders taking place in international waters. You can't kill people in international waters. Under the Constitution, the power to declare war belongs to Congress, but the president is the commander-in-chief of the armed forces, and presidents of both parties have conducted military strikes overseas without congressional approval. Presidents have justified military force in limited actions abroad when it was in the national interest. Wasn't restricted by Congress and didn't rise to the level of war. Was the attack legal under U.S. law? Presidents have generally ordered attacks on enemy combatants, terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda, or militants such as the Houthis in Yemen who attacked U.S. shipping. Tuesday's attack is the first attack, I believe they're saying, on a suspected drug trafficking vessel. Makes a departure in the use of the military. Republican President Donald Trump said in a social media post that the boat was transporting illegal narcotics, which would normally be the responsibility of the U.S. Coast Guard. To intercept, notice the word is intercept and not murder. If the Coast Guard had been fired upon when trying to stop the boat, the Coast Guard members would be justified in defending themselves. Yeah, no shit. However, Republican President Donald Trump posted a video to social media that appeared to show a speeding boat being destroyed by an airstrike. Sounds like murder. Sounds like cold-blooded murder to me. The administration did not provide any evidence that the U.S. was under imminent threat of attack, that the vessel was armed, and did not identify targets on the boat who were critical to a terror attack. We don't even know who was on these boats. Think about that. We don't know who was on the boats. The government should have to tell us the names of all the people it kills. At a minimum. In the eyes of many people around the world, those on the boat were civilians, and the attack will be seen as an extrajudicial killing, said legal experts. So an extrajudicial killing is another word for murder. This often makes me think of the anti-fascist Michael Reinl, who was murdered by government agents who have not been held accountable. He was pulled up on by a bunch of federal agents, and they just killed him in cold blood. He was suspected of a murder, but this is actually not how we prosecute crimes, believe it or not. So extrajudicial killing is another word for murder. That's an important kind of thing to take away from this stream. Extrajudicial. Extrajudicial. I prefer non-judicial. You know, I know prefixes can be vague. I'd prefer non-judicial. Extrajudicial. I had an extramarital affair. It's like the same thing. I had an extramarital affair. Oh, okay. Well, when you put it that way, yeah. The Charter of the UN states that the pursuit of international peace and security members are to refrain from threatening or using force against other countries, also recognize the rights of member states to self-defense. Without evidence of an imminent attack or past attacks by Tren de Aragua, you can't just murder people who may or may not be part of Tren de Aragua. But even if they were, you can't just murder them because we're not at war with them. Also, they might not be active in our country at all. Republican President Donald Trump administration officials said the vessel was in international waters, although if it had been a flagged vessel, it would mean the attack was considered to have occurred on that country's territory. That would represent a potential major escalation. Administration officials have not said if the vessel was flagged. Given that Venezuela's regime and Tren de Aragua are international pariahs, opponents of the attack may not want to challenge it. However, that might change if more attacks are carried out, which they have been. Legal challenges in U.S. courts against the president's authority to carry out the strike will likely face steep hurdles. U.S. courts generally defer to the president on matters of foreign relations and international and security, which is why we need international law. We should not rely on U.S. courts to prosecute the president for this. That's ridiculous. It's never going to work. Victims' families could try to bring civil cases for damages against the administration in the U.S., although it would require years of potentially costly legal litigation. Such attacks do carry the legal risk that the administration will kill an American citizen. Well, we don't know because they haven't told us who they're murdering. The administration of President Barack Obama said it had the authority to kill a U.S.-born al-Qaeda militant because he was the operational leader of an enemy force who posed continued imminent threat. That's fucking insane. That's not a justification. That's not a justification. Being the leader of a force that poses a continued imminent threat. No. And continued imminent threat is bullshit. Like, it's imminent or it's not. And you have to be the one doing the imminent. You can't be leading something that poses an imminent threat. That's not, in my opinion. I'm not a lawyer. It's about you actually posing an imminent threat. You got to be like loading the missile, you know. The attack could be challenged in an international tribunal, such as the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, which has led to some countries acknowledging past abuses, although the United States is not a party to that court. Surprise, surprise. While the attack might not lead to successful legal challenges, it could sour U.S. international relations. Yeah. Republican President Trump ordered denying grants to artists over... Why, I already showed this one. I guess I saved it again. Former French President Sarkozy handed 5-year jail term and stunning downfall. So this has actually since been gone back and forth a little bit. I can't even remember. Is he currently in custody? Oh, now he's potentially facing a second trial linked to Libya finance and witness tampering. But yeah, I just think it's fantastic that that a former president would be held in prison. But I believe he's out of custody. In or out of custody. So hard to say. I believe, yeah, he's back home. He's free pending appeal. So, okay, whatever. I guess that's a rule of law. But yeah, I mean, former presidents are still subject to the laws. A judge halted a Florida immigrant. We already showed this one too. Why do I have duplicates here? Trump administration flouted court order on FEMA grant funding. So another grant issue. Violated a previous court order by implementing a nearly identical policy that again made state cooperation with federal immigration enforcement a condition for receiving grant funding. So just like basically saying, well, I don't want to follow the law. Okay, next up, DOJ whistleblower says he witnessed government officials undermining the rule of law. Erez Roiveni, attorney at Department of Justice, defended Trump's first-term immigration policy, promoted, but then his 15-year career ended when he witnessed government lawyers lying in court and evading orders of a judge. Did a television interview. We're not going to watch that because that would not be boring enough for this stream. Oh, it's an interview. But he met with Emil Bove, this guy who lacks any sort of moral or legal credibility. A real cretin, a real gross person who's going to face serious accountability soon enough. Told this guy and other people that over the weekend the president would be signing a proclamation invoking something called the Alien Enemies Act, a wartime law from 1798 invoked 3 times in the nation's history during the War of 1812, the World War I and World War II, allowing rapid expulsion from the U.S. of the citizens of enemy nations during a war so that Stephen Miller can sleep at night. But we're not actually at war. And still, the president wanted to traffic people out of our country with the support of the Republicans and apologists. And Bove emphasized those planes need to take off no matter what. Now, this is obviously what led to Kilmar Garcia and a bunch of other people being sent to torture camps in El Salvador, with the right-wing dictatorship there working in collaboration with our autocracy. And specifically, we have a government lawyer telling other government lawyers to tell the court, fuck you. And this was apparently the third official using expletives to tell career attorneys that they may just have to disregard federal court orders. So Complexities in the rule of law. Complexities. And we have the government lawyers violating the law. So much so that even other people who worked with the previous administration of Trump, are like, dude, come on, man. I gotta, have some plausible deniability for my family and friends. Some of us have family and friends, Emil Bove, is what this guy's thinking. All right, 2 more examples. Man pardoned after storming Capitol is charged with threatening to kill Hakeem Jeffrey. So is anyone keeping track of how many people pardoned for storming the Capitol have committed subsequent crimes? Because it's a lot. And that's what happens when you don't have accountability. These are not bad people. These are people who have done something wrong, who should face accountability so that they can learn from their actions. What are they supposed to learn when they don't face accountability? What do you expect? So this is just one guy. There's all these people like this. You can't just pardon people and let them get away with illegal actions. It's one thing to commute the sentence of someone who's done non-violent drug offenses. And it's another to pardon in one fell scoop 1,600 people. Is that the right amount? Did I just make that up? Wait, where did I? 1,500 plus people charged with crimes of the Capitol riot, including assaulting police officers, using clemency power, including people assaulting police officers, and other violent crimes. It's just it flies in the face of law. I mean, it really just flies in the face of law. Ordered them to dismiss 450 cases that were pending as well. Because they like him and they make him feel warm and fuzzy. And no, really because the Republican autocracy knows that these people are their brown shirts and these people are their diehards, and they don't want to alienate these people, but specifically they need to show and signal to other people, you do what we tell you and we will protect you. And that's an important part of their flouting of the rule of law. And last example on today's stream of rule of law and all the fun ins and outs of it. From last month, U.S. judge rules Republican President Donald Trump illegally ordered National Guard to Portland, Oregon. So, again, this stuff goes back and forth and ends up at the Supreme Court. But it's just another example of judges ruling that executive actions were illegal. So, what did we learn? You know what I mean? Because as I said at the beginning, this is not you know what I mean? If you want to learn about the rule of law, this is not where you come. This is not where you come. I'm not being humble. You have to actually read a book about it. And you should go to a legal scholar's perspective. If you want to learn about the rule of law, you should go to a legal scholar. Try to not find the one fringe guy who has a weird take. Try to get a few different examples. Try to find someone who's well respected in the field, who is, treated as a serious person. And not just a YouTuber. But I just want us all to have a grasp of what the rule of law means, just to be able to talk about it, so that when we're talking about rule of law, we're not just talking about laws we like. We're talking about the way that laws are put forward and carried out and enforced. And there being more and less illegal ways for laws to actually be put forward and carried out and enforced. So, hey, we got a long ways to go with this whole society thing, but, let's try to stay aware of what's going on and do our best to advocate for justice in our communities and in our states and in our countries. And let's try to work on that. So how about we do that? Thanks for watching. Feel free to go to the Podcast Verbal Journal channel where I do weekly podcasts. Those are really fun, and we talk about all kinds of stuff. I'll be back on this main channel soon enough. I got, I'm watching all the Pluribus episodes and talking about those on the podcast on the VJP, so check that out. Eventually, maybe I'll post something on the main channel here about Pluribus. It's a great show. You got to check it out. It's kind of a legal word, even. And that's pretty much it. So great talking with you. And, feel free to support me on Patreon or YouTube memberships. It means a lot, but you don't have to if you don't want to, or if you don't have the money and so on. But, appreciate your time. Thanks so much. And keep ruling that law and lawing that rule. I don't know if that's the best way to end it.